maybe for all of you. Thank you very much for coming. As Oliver said, I do feel a little bit of fraud because I've spent the last 30 years really mainly in Southeast Asia, working on sustainable forest management in those parts of the world. And in doing that, I was involved in some of the very early Forest Stewardship Council certifications throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific Rim. Part of that has often been trying to trace timber through from Papua New Guinea to the Olympic Games in Australia and in Sydney, and often working with high street retailers in this part of the world who, they have corporate social responsibility commitments to have sustainable timber. They have factories that they like and use in areas such as Vietnam or whatever. They say, and my job has occasionally been to try and go to the people in Vietnam and explain what, fundamentally what sustainability means, and then where they can source their timber. So that has thrown up a number of issues over time, certainly I was, back in 2001, I was responsible, partly, for pulling the plug on the single largest teak producer in the world, who was supplying a vast majority of the teak for the garden furniture industry. Nobody, or the retailers, the B&Qs, the yard bosses, or whatever of this world, were happily sourcing timber and didn't know how fragile their supply chain was. When I went to a trade fair in Germany, where this all came to a head, I think had they known in the room that I was responsible for doing it, I might have lynched at the time. Anyway, one of the spin-offs from that was because a supply chain suddenly found that one of its major raw materials had dried up, then you suddenly got people being much more imaginative about other species, and you got eucalyptus growers in Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, or whatever, and South Africa, and you got acacia growers throughout the tropics, suddenly realizing that the timbers that they had been growing initially for pulp and paper actually started having far more value as saw logs as a substitute for teak. I say this partly just because I think that what one is looking for, or what one should expect when you're kind of constraining your supply chain in any way, is that you will have slightly unexpected spin-offs which you have to be kind of cognizant of and be opportunistic about. I thought I'd ask you to all just think. I believe there are going to be 650 units potentially in the Phoenix project. Just keep it to yourself, but how much hectareage of forest do you think that may involve harvesting? And it's really useful to have some kind of order of magnitude in your own head before you sort of start getting excited about something or rejecting it out of hand. What is different, I think, in setting up something for southeast of England to produce material to be used in the southeast of England, where it's different from the chain of custody system and the certification system in the global market, is I think it's likely, or there is an expectation, that everybody is buying it along the trade chain, is likely to buy into the end objective. But it's very important that the system that you end up designing remains credible. If we design something which means that people along the supply chain are getting financial benefit from supplying locally, then there is always the possibility that people will seek to take advantage of that and sneak in timber from the Midlands or from Scotland or something like that. Therefore, there is, in designing something here, it's a question of striking a balance between recognising that the likelihood is that we don't need to do a great deal in terms of policing the system. It's a question of setting up the system. But recognise that if we're very, very successful, then that might have implications on cost and price and tempt people into seeing how they can manipulate the system. There are kind of three, I would say, sources of potential supply. Can somebody wave at me when there's 5 minutes left? If you would.
You've got 10 minutes.
You've got 10 minutes. I've got 10 minutes. Okay. There are three basic, I think, categories of supply in the southeast. One, Forestry Commission. Forestry Commission is going to kind of basically underwrite the total volume. You've then got sort of estates of a larger size. You might look in West Sussex at Cowdrey or Petworth or somewhere like that, which has enough material where they can start planning to sell for, so they're selling a volume every year. And then you've got smaller producers or one-off situations where you've got individual ash trees coming down because of ash dieback or whatever, and how do you want to feed those in to the supply chain. One of the objectives I was told was, which the local authority were putting on the project, is that they hoped that that by sourcing locally, one might reduce the carbon footprint. I think that realistically, on a sort of relatively one-off basis, that's going to be hard to actually demonstrate, or even with 650 units, a system bringing in milled material from the Baltic or whatever may be demonstrably more carbon efficient if it's only used once for 650 homes. If we can get a system which allows this process of utilising local timber to be established in a way that the lessons we learned over the next however many years make it not a one-off, then there is the potential to have an impact all the way along the supply chain. I think there's for me, the last speakers were talking about how you're linking back to the, you're getting people excited about linking back to their own environment with the materials that they use. I think that by linking the Phoenix project with potential suppliers and saying, we know there's a large timber stock in the southeast, but we know it's not very good quality, and we as the development proponents want to invest back to make sure that the next round of timber grown is of a better provenance or whatever, then I think, and you're talking to the eventual end users of the housing development about that, then you can create a virtuous circle. There is a lot of information throughout the trade chain. The Forestry Commission have their national inventory. Now that this area falls in Kent, East Sussex and South London in their kind of, their inventory looks at that. In there they say there is 103,000 hectares of forest in that area. But it's very fragmented. It is going to be my suggestion, if we go to whoever the decision makers are, they actually include the South Downs and Solent area, which the Forestry Commission also kind of, that's the next, which is Surrey and over into Hampshire. And that gives a little bit more flexibility about the sort of age structure and the timber available. It also has the major advantage, luckily, of just taking in Southampton, which has the BSW sawmill, which is just about the only remaining sawmill in the southeast, which could develop things on a scale of producing enough for 650 houses. So I think realistically we can consider looking at those two areas, and there's already an inventory for those two areas. Those the Forestry Commission, who are responsible for issuing forestry licenses, also kind of administratively understand that area. And so in trying to trace the timber through, we can also start looking at the impact of what supplying from the people who were building the house out of chestnut, the people who planted that chestnut weren't building it for house building. Quite likely they were building it, growing it for hop bats, an industry which, the hop industry doesn't exist anymore. But that's what you wanted a 25-year-old dead straight sort of 5-meter stem for. That was what you get your best money for. I've been to coppicing where they then start coppicing at 5 or 7 years to make walking sticks, because it's relatively easy to bend. But the people who planted it, again, weren't planting it for walking sticks. They were so the idea that the timescales within forestry are such that you may plant for pulp and paper, then the teak disappears, so your eucalyptus or your acacia suddenly becomes much more valuable. I think that 2 minutes. Okay. So, okay, 2 minutes left. Who wants to posit an answer to how many hectares of forest it will take to put up 650 houses? Go on, somebody give me a guess.
50.
6.
6. 50. 56. Any advance on 56?
120.
600.
500.
Okay. But I reckon if there are about 14 cubic metres in each house of finished timber, that's about 30 cubic metres of roundwood, and that, I reckon, just back of an envelope is about 75 hectares. So out of 103,000 hectares in southeast England, I think we can probably find 75 hectares which is suitable for this project. Yes, sir.
I think that clear felling historically has been the single biggest reason for timber depreciation. When you discovered teak, we all knew that was running out. Burmese teak came in after, and Honduran mahogany ran out, and oak is running out. The problem we have with the timber, wider timber use, is that people demand single species. Why doesn't Forest Stewardship Council do much, much more to encourage people to accept species other than the known half a dozen?
I will maybe talk about that after in the question time. But I would also like them to start taking it, not over-engineer everything. I mean, pinhole or whatever doesn't make a jot of difference to the quality of most timber. So, no, I'm with you on that.
This is driven by marketing, it's driven by retailing most, and, and that has to turn on its head. Architects are open to new ideas, but often they say, oh, but my client wants home.
Well, for the first 5 years of my life, I just spent the whole time selling Philippine Meranti from Borneo as Philippine Luan, which is similar, but that's the architects only have ever heard of Philippine Luan because anyway, more questions.